Good afternoon and good evening to all our participants that have joined us today. I'm your host, Noel, for today's interesting session. Well, to begin with, let me also start by saying that foundit is a platform that curates the path to possibilities for you to find exactly what you seek and be able to say, found it. We want to be your trusted partner to enable and connect the right talent with the right opportunities through a data-driven approach that offers personalized and customized journeys for job seekers and recruiters alike. Well, I want to also welcome all the participants that are joining with us today. And please do inform all your colleagues and friends that the webinar is about to get started in a couple of seconds. And it's great to see all of you joining in across APAC and Gulf. Well, RecRoute is an initiative by foundit, formerly Monster APAC and ME, to connect CEOs, CHROs, and leaders in the HR and talent acquisition space with HR and TA professionals through a series of webinar sessions. So I look forward to also welcoming you to foundit RecRoute session number 18. And it's a privilege to host this session for all of you today. And we have an interesting topic, building a winning talent acquisition playbook as well. And I'm sure everyone's probably looking forward for this too. Well, before that, I want to also highlight that hiring the right talent for the right job is the key when it comes to organizational success. Though this may sound straightforward and simple, but it's not. In the absence of a sound acquisition strategy, your recruiting process may be laden with potential mistakes and could not deliver the results that you want. That's why you need a playbook, a game plan with a proven method that's designed keeping in mind the ever-evolving talent landscape. Well, to talk more about the topic for us today, we have Mr. Sanjeev Pradhan Roy, Senior Talent Strategist based in Dubai and host of In Conversation with Roy, Global Leaders podcast and blog. Well, Mr. Sanjeev Pradhan Roy is a senior talent strategist based in Dubai with 16 years of experience in MENA and 23 plus years globally. He has straddled different hats as head talent acquisition, P&L head, entrepreneur, HR strategist, director, executive search, and mentor, besides being a panel speaker at various conventions like HR Tech Middle East, International HR Conference, and AESC forums as well. Mr. Roy has also been a guest lecturer at various leading universities, institutes such as IIM Indore, India, and Maastricht University, Europe, and Amity University, Dubai as well. Mr. Roy is also a music enthusiast and a nature aficionado. Well, over to you, Mr. Roy. It's such a pleasure to have you aboard.
Thank you so much, Noel, for a very generous introduction. Thank you so much to all the attendees. Thank you so much for your time, for your patience. And I'd like to also thank the foundit team really to come up with a theme that is so evergreen, really. The landscapes are changing by the day as we speak, but certain elements of hiring is always fundamental. And that's one of the reasons why we looked at this particular topic, which is building a winning talent acquisition playbook. Just to share with you, that as I was driving back from my office to home, I was just pondering a bit about the theme, really. And I think the very fact that we've used talent acquisition, not recruitment itself, I think is half the battle won. Because I think we have moved away from the mindset of very, very ad hoc, arbitrary, short change kind of recruitment strategy to a future-looking, futuristic, customer experience-focused talent acquisition strategy. Having said that, there are various parallels to how we can look at this particular topic, and probably at the end of the particular session, which is roughly around 40-45 minutes, I believe there'll be certain key takeaways that we can probably look at it, reflect on, and maybe draw a parallel between what happens in theory, what's really on the ground. And probably if that helps shape up your own strategy wherever you are, I think the session is worth its time. Well, just give me a bit of a moment while I upload my screen.
Well, as you do that, sir, I guess we can also go ahead and quickly run the poll to be able to understand
Sure.
The industries that our participants are from. So with your permission, may I launch the first poll for today?
Please. Thank you, Noel.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the poll is launched, and I request all of you to please kindly take your poll. As Mr. Roy also presents his screen, it will also help us identify and also note what industries are you guys from as well. And we welcome you all again to the session. It's such a pleasure to host you all today alongside Mr. Roy. And I'll just keep that poll up and running for the next 5 seconds, and then we can probably take it off. I request all of you to kindly participate in the poll as well. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll probably end the poll, sir. And with your permission, may I also share the results?
Sure.
Perfect. All right. So here's the results. So we have people from IT, ICS, BPO, banking, accounting, manufacturing, education, and e-commerce, retail as well.
Lovely.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great. So let's, without much ado, take it forward in terms of this session. Now, this session really is close to my heart as well, because this is one craft that I'm trying to fine-tune for the last 20 odd years. A good part of 16 odd years has been in the MENA region, working across different fences, really, be it consulting, be on the corporate side. Also been an entrepreneur when I ran in my own search firm, consulting for big clients. So I'll try and make it as crisp and probably as relevant as you might find it. So moving on to the session though, let me start off with probably a thought. You know, in life, we are replete with individuals and experts, you know, who take great relish in terms of being expert in a particular domain, in a particular specialization, so to speak. And that's your knowledge for you, though. But where knowledge really has to find its own feet and give you outcomes that matter, you'll have to also look at it as to how it plays out in the real world. That's where the wisdom comes in. Just giving you probably a bit of a crude analogy to understand this concept better, just to give you a perspective. Knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, not a vegetable. Wisdom is knowing not to include it in a fruit salad. So that's what differentiates you from the theory world to the practical world, really, where you'll be faced with great kind of scenarios that will be ever changing. No one day is like the day spent earlier, and the next day might be absolutely a different game changer. So with that thought, though, let's start off with a particular anecdote from Lawrence Bossidy, who's the CEO for GE Capital. And he said that there's nothing more important than hiring and developing people. At the end of the day, we bet on people, not on strategies. Industry is shaped by people, and people shape the outcomes for the different sectors of the industries that we apply. And that itself is a fundamental rule. And that is the reason why talent acquisition is the most important and quantifiable function in the HR domain, or probably if you compare it with any functions in the organization. I think talent acquisition is something that can either make or break an organization by the sheer value of adding people in. Looking at hiring, right? So we are all in the business of hiring. I understand we would have an eclectic mix of attendees today who come in from different sides of life, be it on the corporate side, be it the business side, be on the consulting side as well. But the common thread for all of us, the golden thread really is the hiring. That is what we are concerned with, right? So if you look at hiring, basically, it comes in two facets. There's one part which says hire, and there's a second part which has a ring to it. What does this imply, right? It's about you attracting and engaging a talent. That's your high part of it, right? At the same time, what happens after that engagement and attraction is a ring part of it. And ring is probably a part of your experience. So be it your brand experience, by virtue of which you attract talents. It could be your customer or a candidate experience, through which different touch points you're in touch with the candidates. It could be a user experience, because you might employ tools or ATS or job postings and all of that, through which they have an impression of the organization. So the user experience, how seamless is it? How less cumbersome it can be? And you also have something called the employee experience, because when you go into a career site or to a portal and then you see employees speaking about the experiences in that organization, that is a bigger experience set than anything else. Now, if you look at this experience curve, though, that is what really, makes an organization thrive, survive, or go bust. Because in that experience lies the very essence of hiring and hiring right. So with that thought, let's take it forward in terms of what kind of landscapes we will traverse towards this presentation this evening. One is the talent acquisition journey or the architecture. Irrespective of organizations across multinationals or large local family groups, be it a startup ecosystem, across sectors, really, you have to look at a particular talent journey or a talent acquisition journey that really, sets you up for either failure or success. And we'll try and dissect this in more detail as we go forward, just giving you a nuance in terms of what to expect. Moving on, you're looking at the hiring maturity curve. Now, every organization worth its salt, irrespective of how many years it's been in the business, have a certain semblance of maturity in terms of hiring. When I say hiring, it could be hiring practices, processes, experiences, the sum part of all these subsets that goes into making a candidate feel wow or feel neglected, right? So we'll try and assess what the hiring maturity curve is, and we'll also look at a couple of key components or competencies really that drive an organization to move up from level 1 to level 2 to level 3 to level 4 in terms of how mature they are on that front. Then we understand a profile and also a success profile. Now, many cases we look at hiring in terms of certain positions, headcount, candidates, but what we don't understand or we don't invest much time on is an understanding the profile mix that we would want to fill a particular talent gap. Is it about the hiring managers coming to you in terms of very concrete and detailed job specs that captures your current expectation of the role, the future expectation of the role might be on in terms of scalability, and being able to go out and map the right kind of companies, organizations, and talents thereon who might be a great fit for what we have to achieve in the coming days, weeks, months, and years to follow, right? And in doing that comes a second subset of profile is a success profile, which most of the executive search firms use. And we'll try and see what is the makeup of the success profile. Moving on further, one of the key differentiators of how talents get reviewed, evaluated, and probably we follow a dictum of art and science in the hiring is a structured hiring process. And how does that take shape? What kind of scenarios does it deal with? Does it vary across levels that we hire for? Does it vary across sectors that we hire for? And so on and so forth. And in doing that, what are those tools and techniques and approaches that a hiring manager, maybe a recruiter, or maybe the business head has to believe in and adhere to make that engagement experience, hiring experience, that much more wow. Moving on further, probably one part of it that we kind of assume or take for granted is that we assume that recruitment is only the recruiter's job or the talent acquisition practitioner's job, which is not the case really, because if you move up higher onto the hiring maturity curve, you'll find organizations that really dig deep in terms of their own internal teams and find different voices who are able to add profoundly to the hiring journey. So we'll try and see what is the makeup of it and how is it relevant to our discussions today. And then we look at perspectives, right? So in my hiring journey in here, it's been 16 years across consulting as well as corporate funds. And well, I had the privilege of meeting a lot of exciting people, a lot of people whom I learned from, and a lot of people who probably give you experiences that probably in hindsight, you just reflect back and have a smile on your face, right? I'll give you a couple of perspectives where it's not always gray, as in you cannot use the intellect always. IQ is great. Sometimes you also have to bang a lot on EQ. EQ is the defining competency that's taking it forward. So one of the CEO candidates whom I was interviewing for a role, and a very high profile candidate at that, and I asked him, fair enough, let's meet up at a designated time, place, and so on and so forth. We found the time, found the place. And when we met as a part of a senior hiring, of course, it is not an interview, it's really a meeting and an interaction. So I posed him a very general question, just as an icebreaker, and I asked him, how have you been so far? And he had a very interesting way of putting across his situation at that point in time. He said, Roy, my job currently is being like a mushroom. And I was very intrigued as to like a mushroom. Yes, it is just like being a mushroom. They keep me in the dark. They keep piling in all the dirt. And one fine day, probably they'll have me canned. That was a very profound way of expressing where you are and what your situation wasn't, and hence the reason why you were looking out for, right? As a talent acquisition practitioner, you have to be able to be agile to these kind of circumstances. We are put on the spot. So I responded saying, well, it's not a surprise. It happens in a lot of fungal environments, and that's where you need to take a call, whether you have to be in there to be further fungalized or you move on, and that really struck the chord, and we took it further, and finally we hired that guy as well. But it is these kind of conversations that just gives you a sense as to how the candidates, especially niche candidates with specialized candidates and high profile candidates, look for when they're interacting with a talent acquisition person. Do they have the same kind of, let's say, emotional maturity? Do they have that wherewithal to be able to speak shoulder to shoulder, eye to eye? That is very important. One more candidate whom I met, and probably that is a certain memory that comes back to me very fondly, and I have a smile on my face, is, and I was interviewing a guy, and he was working in a very high profile organization. For me, as a part of my competition benchmark, that was the organization to hire from. But yes, he was settled, he was doing well, and all of that. That's what I assumed. When we had a meeting across, then he shared this, Roy, my job, my profile is just like being an onion. And I said, onion? Why do you objectify things like that? He said, just being like an onion, I peel off layer after layer after layer after layer, and you find there's nothing in it. That showed, that conveyed the message that yes, he's not very happy at where he is because his job is not getting enlarged. There's stagnation where he is, and that's the reason why he's looking out. So you have to be able to connect the dots really and try and make the conversation that much more worthwhile for the candidate across the table for you. So that's a mix of gray and gray really. The EQ and the IQ has to really come together in a good talent acquisition practitioner. And I think that paves the way to much more worthwhile conversations with the very ever-changing talent landscape. Moving on further, there's a question that I generally have a lot of queried answers to really, which is more dangerous, rejecting a good talent or hiring a bad talent? Think of this in the context of a good hire. Also think of it in the context of a bad hire. And how does that impact the organization going forward, right? When you reject a good talent, do you have the mechanism to go back to him or her and say, fair enough, you know what, we goofed up. Can we try it again? Probably not. The journey is lost. Especially versus when you hire a bad talent, right? And this kind of hiring happens because sometimes we take judgment calls. The blend of art and science generally is not the case in these kind of scenarios. And hence, as you all know, the cost of a bad hire creates a ripple effect across the organization in terms of the teams, your competition, your company image, reputation, the downtime in terms of business, and so on and so forth, right? So these are a few contexts that we have to keep in mind as well as we explore the dimension of a winning talent acquisition playbook. Moving forward, there are 4 pillars really of an organization success, as that's the way I see it really. You have the financial capital, you have the intellectual capital, you have the human capital, of course, and you have the social capital. Depending on where we are, which sector that we represent, and what is the kind of presence that we've had, either as a market leader or a wannabe market leader, these are the 4 facets that are the pillars of any organizational success. interesting point is that the last three, if you look at intellectual capital, human capital, and social capital, starts with hiring and hiring right. And the first one, which is the financial capital, the revenues, the EBITDA, the net profit, margins, and all of that, is a consequence of hiring right. That itself conveys you a lot in terms of how significant is the function of hiring, and thereby being able to look at talent acquisition as the most quantifiable function in any organization that you can speak of. All this while, we spoke about some candidate experiences, some of the talent acquisition experiences, the organizational experiences. I'll take you very briskly, though, in terms of what the candidate also thinks, right? The kind of talent landscape we have today, millennials, and you have the Gen Z, zillennials, and so on and so forth. Some scenarios which you might be familiar with. Candidates, right? I'm happy and not exploring. So there's a passive candidate for you. I'm happy, but would not mind exploring if sensitively approached. What do I mean by sensitively approached? It means that if I'm approached by a talent acquisition practitioner who knows his salt and who knows his domain and is able to have an informed and educated discussion with me, I don't mind, because those pedigrees are a bit rare in this part of the world. I'm happy, but wouldn't know what's around for me to mull over, which means, again, a passive candidate, very choosy, very finicky, but if approached right, he could be the star that you're looking for. I'm not happy, but would engage with only few who I trust. That again goes back to the kind of experience sets you've had with the talent acquisition practitioners across fences, corporate, in-house, the whole hog, really, right? So you have to be able to be credible in terms of what you do. I'm not happy and would engage with all. This probably is somebody who is in the market for a job, might not always be will be the best talent that you would want, but at the same time, let's not be judgmental. Let's meet, assess, and then take that call. I'm looking at desperate. Well, that says it. Probably not a great talent pool to look at. What will matter? Engagement experience. It's all about experience, ladies and gentlemen. It's what makes or breaks a relationship, a hire, or also your future hires. Respect for time and candor. Now, that is something that we take it for granted. Most of the conventional organizations who are at a lower end of the hiring maturity curve, they believe that they are doing a favor to the candidates, who come in all the way to sit down there in the meeting rooms, sharing their life stories, their journeys, and all of that. And we not being able to reciprocate the same for the people who have invested the time and effort in doing so. Thirdly, the approach. Are we professional in terms of approaching candidates? Are we professional in terms of evaluating, assessing them? Are we professional even if the interview or the meeting doesn't go right? Are we professional enough to end it on a good note so that that relationship continues and lingers? So this is where the paradigm shift has to happen, really, because the top talent journey is really shrinking by the day. There's a huge talent war for talent, as they say, that is coming in. And that's compounded by the fact that we look at different syndromes, right? Great resignation, quiet quitting, quiet firing, hiring, and all of that, right? So you are in a very pure spot where you have to make your moves right. Fair enough. Let's dive deep in terms of some of the best practices in interviews and selection. And in doing that, let's try and decode. So what we call as a Da Vinci Code, really. We use certain terms very fluidly, very loosely. So we combine skills and competencies together, which is not really the same case. Skills is something that you become good at, in terms of doing a particular job for a particular period of time. Competencies is a blend of your knowledge, of your skills and behavior sets, really. So when we hire somebody, it is not only for skills, it is for competencies. And as you move forward, though, and as you move higher on the hiring maturity curve, you will have something called a competency framework for each job family that then goes backwards to your KRA KPIs, forwards to your assessment center, and that parallelly stays away with your psychometric assessments and all of that. So there's a linkage and connecting the dot syndrome that happens when you have the right competency frameworks. Where does the competency frameworks come from? They come in from your values or your purpose. Where does the purpose and value come from? They come in from your mission statement. The mission statement comes in from your vision. So ideally, the organizational business objectives that gets cascaded down, percolates down to different functions. That's our competencies, which are mainly behavioral, are formed and driven. Let's look at the levels and techniques as well. In fact, there are different sets of hiring that we do: leadership hiring, we do mid-level hiring, we do volume hiring as well, right? And in doing that, the same size fits all window approach does not work. And it doesn't work because the candidates are different, the profile is different, and obviously it requires different approach in doing that. Let's try and very quickly dissect each of these hiring levels. Leadership hiring, well, you need to be very well researched, better than what the candidate can anticipate. Give him that moment of awe in terms of you coming back with an anecdote or a finding or an industry insight that he might be willing to invest his time on, and he'll trust you more. Respect his time and experience goes without saying. Operate from a position of strength. Very often I've seen, and I have also seen a lot of my counterparts and my industry network as well, talent acquisition people, when they get across to interviewing a CEO or probably a CXO suite, really at that level, they operate not from a position of strength, but they are slightly submissive in terms of, they are very scared, they're very skeptical. I don't know how the meeting will go off, what he thinks about me, and so on and so forth. It's very important, A, to be well researched, to be a subject matter expert, or try and research as much as you can to drive an informed conversation. Operate from a position of strength. It's always a mutual agreement. It's always a marriage of two similar parties coming together, your client and the candidate, or the candidate to the client, and vice versa. Then you look at sell the vision. Now, when you deal with senior candidates, they don't need the JD. Absolutely not. JD itself is a very archaic concept. We moved on from JDs to job specs, and that keeps changing, right, with the changing times. What the senior suite needs to know is, what's your vision? Where do you stand? Where do you want to grow? Where do you see yourself 5 years down the line? Where can I play my part? And what is it in for me? That's the vision for you, really. So unless you're aligned internally in terms of your internal stakeholders, and you get the gist and the juice of what you're hiring for and what that particular role will entail, the conversation will not be as varied as you might like. Progressive and subtle probing. You don't do a grill to the bone with the leadership hiring. You build on it on terms of nuances. You let them speak, look at cues, look at leads, build it further from there. At the end of the day, give them situations, give them scenarios. They come back to you, you validate it more, you move from there. Not an interview, it's always a meeting. I have seldom found a CXO suite worth his salt, his or her salt, coming to meet you if you say it's an interview. At that point in time of the career, 25, 30 years, or let's say high-flying executive, he doesn't want to get interviewed. It's a meeting, it's an exchange of ideas and thoughts. Prepare for the long haul. Some of these hires will take a long time, so you've got to be patient. And it's not something that will have probably a notice period of a couple of weeks or probably a month. Sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes 4 months, sometimes 6 months, depending on what kind of seniority you're hiring. Sustain unconditional engagement. That is what people, take it for granted. It's always an outcome-based. With talents, it's never outcome-based. It's always a continual journey. The simple reason being, it's a small world, right? The same candidate whom you meet today, probably not suitable for you at this point in time, might be suitable for you as a vendor, as a client. Tomorrow he goes down and probably the fence is absolutely different. So don't burn the bridge. Always keep it respectful and make his worth his while. Mid-level hiring is slightly more nuanced, more, let's say, direct, so well-researched approach. Again, you need to know what you're speaking about. Speak matter of fact, speak about data, linkages, and all of that. Grill to the bone, and I'll probably share with you as to how we can do that. Expectation setting, absolutely, you have a budget to start off with, and you have a certain expectations in terms of the criteria of the role, and that's what you are looking at mapping. It might not be exactly a ticking the box in terms of JD, but more or less you need to know the DNA of the person you're hiring for. And that is explained very, very crisply at the front side of things. Trade-off and so on. There are certain cases, your budget might probably be similar and probably at what the candidate is drawing at the moment. So your selling point would be, let's look at a cost-benefit analysis. Let me look at a trade-off and a sort. If I were in your shoes, I would view this in this manner, and this is what it looks like to me. So it totally depends on the competence of the talent acquisition practitioner. Be specific, don't be broad. Volume-based, again, it's the blitz. It's really, you go one by one, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and take it forward from there. Being upfront, operate at the same level. If you're hiring for an engineer at a lower end, you have to operate like an engineer. If you're hiring a steward or a cabin crew, you have to operate like one. So you understand where they come from, and you're able to get down to the topic of the day instantly, right? Instead of going around the bush. Competency-based interviews, basically I call it ATT, which is the approach, tools, and techniques. So this is something that we continue to use, and this has really served us well, not in terms of being the only approach that you can use, but it really prepares you well. And as you do it over a period of time, it becomes a part of your DNA subconsciously. It's called the Wiseman, really. So when you have to go in to interview a candidate, this is the Wiseman approach which you do. Because as you know, an interview has a pre, during, and post phase. So this is the pre part is, of course, they have to be really researched. They need to know about the candidate, and then being able to ask the right kind of questions, which is a competency-based hiring questions, right? But before that, how does the structure of the interview process need to be professional? There's an approach which is used by Fortune 500 companies as well, and this is a tried and tested approach that has worked for me as well in the past 16 odd years. And that's what I will probably dive deep in. Star versus funnel. This is an interview technique that probably will share in the next couple of minutes. And there's an interview guide. So very interesting parallels that you can use as a part of your playbook, really, and immediately implement it. Let's look at the approach part of it. Wiseman. W stands for welcome, which is you welcome the candidates, of course. Then you introduce yourself. You summarize as to why the candidate is there for, what the role is all about, so that you both are on the same page. Put at ease, break the ice. Let's not only talk about the job at hand, talk about something about his life, how was his day, and so on and so forth, to calm down the nerves, really. Make notes. Seek permission from the candidate, saying, "Fair, if you don't mind, I will make certain notes as we speak on." And if he says yes, if he or she says yes, you take it. There's a part of courtesy, really. So making notes. Ask questions and clarify if you don't understand. If you are in doubt, ask it from the horse's mouth there and there. Don't assume or don't suppose. Once the interview is over, it's a courteous step to be able to say what follows next. So even if you have liked the candidate, even if you have not liked the candidate, it is probably a good practice not to convey it right there. Take a bit of a time to go back, a couple of days to mull over, compare a couple of candidates, and then being able to relay that feedback. Because if you do it on the spot, you are making probably a judgment call. And I will tell you why it's going to be a judgment call in that half an hour's chat. And as a part of active listening, PQRS is a technique that works. You paraphrase, you question where you have doubts, question deep. You reflect in terms of what the candidate has articulated. It might not be in the same sense that probably you might want to hear a particular question being answered, but take his viewpoint, his logic, his flow of thought, and then being able to summarize, saying, fair enough, if you have given him a scenario and he has responded to you in a certain term, you say, fair enough. So what you are trying to say, and as I understand from you, this is what you are trying to imply. That puts both of you in the correct scenario. Let's look at the technique part. STAR, which is your situation. Situation is what specific challenge or problem he or she has faced. Task is basically what was the objective of the goal. And then we have action, which is what steps they would have taken and why. And result, which is the outcome, be it positive or negative. So this is the funnel approach, really. You start at the broad base and then you absolutely funnel it down, 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 unless you find the crux of the competency that you're looking for. Situation, the STAR technique works well because you're able to validate somebody's experience beyond what is written in the CV or what he or she is trying to sell, and you give them a scenario and you ask them to walk you through that. Really, a situation, how do you respond? What steps do you take in terms of resource, budget? What are the timelines, the scheduling part of what do you do in terms of planning? Where did you face a constraint? Was it a smooth process? And if the outcome was negative, why and what would they do differently? If the outcome was positive, well, you have your guy. Interview guide, and then we have the funnel, really. Funnel is, again, the pyramid structure of probing, wherein you start at a very, very, very broad base, and then you zero down the specifics as you move forward. So this gives you an insight of the candidate, which will not be very clearly spelled out or might be window dressed in the CV as they share with you. Now, the last part of the interview selection process here is the interview guide. This is a very, very important template that you can use, and it just probably has an A4 size paper. You have plus on one quadrant, minus another quadrant, gaps and questions. So if you look through a CV or a recruiter toolkit of a candidate and you go through the CV, you might have certain aspects of his journey, which is a positive for you. So list down the positives, list down the negatives, look at certain gaps in the experience, probably in terms of seniority, project completion, achievements, impact, and all of that. And then you frame your own questions, which is much more than what your interviewing questionnaire will have. And once you go in with this mindset, you are absolutely prepared. So when you meet a candidate, the oft repeated mistake that you do when you meet a candidate is, tell me something about yourself. Come on, you don't invest your time researching the candidate's CV. You have the CV in front of you for the last couple of days. That is absolutely a discourteous statement to make. So instead of doing that, you go in there and say, well, you know, I understand you have worked here and here, you've achieved this, but there might be a learning journey, right? And how did that journey pan out for you? Okay, you look at gaps, you know, all said and done, it's a fantastic journey for you. I'm not just being curious as what happened there in that particular period of time. And, you know, I'm not able to connect the dots. Can you help me in that? That comes the story really, and you validate it further. Questions, probably going beyond the questionnaire that we ask. You know, you would have certain questions in terms of the sector, in terms of market trends, in terms of insight, market intelligence, that you would want that particular resource to answer, which will give you a sense of saying, fair enough, he can do the core job, but is he scalable, right? So these are the conversations that you need to drive. Moving on, all the TV and trends that we see nowadays, just take a moment to see it, mull over it. And this is becoming the trend for a lot of good practice organizations in terms of hiring. They're moving away from hiring managers to hiring by hiring committee. So a very impartial, neutral hiring committee, which includes people from that particular brand or different cross-functional brand. They come together, they're given the job specs, they're given the criteria, they're given the expectations, and they then go and assess the candidates and give their neutral views. Because a hiring manager might be sometimes biased, might be conditioned by his or her experience, and he will let that bias play out, which is in the second statement, though, with the second trend. It's an exercise in confirmation bias in interviews, ladies and gentlemen. It's proven by research studies done by Harvard for a very, very long time, that you make a snap decision of a candidate's prowess or efficacy in the first 5 or 10 seconds. First 10 seconds, how the candidate comes across, you've already made up your mind, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you make him fail. So at the end of the day, you're just trying to substantiate your doubts and your prophecy. At the end of the day, you conclude, fair enough, you know what? Well, that was my initial impression. That's how it works. So hence, if the hiring managers don't undergo workshops, they are not exposed to really, you know, the changing trends, understanding profiles, talent landscape, they will find themselves in this scenario where they'll bring in their own personal bias. It might not be wrong, but what happens is you hire like for like. If you're from a particular region, ethnicity, or from a particular background, you will prefer to have people in your team who are from a particular background. That doesn't serve your DEI index at all. And neither does it serve the purpose of hiring a talent and not from a particular ethnicity or from a race or from a particular experience set. So that is what, you know, has to happen. If your organization is not evolved enough to hire by a hiring committee yet, you have to equip and train the hiring managers to think beyond what they see, you know. So it should not be an exercise in confirmation bias, snap judgment call from a thin slice of interaction. Then yes, structured interview questions, that is a must, otherwise you cannot. Unless you ask the same kind of questions on a competency framework with, let's say, 5 or 6 candidates, how are you able to rate them after the end of those interviews and take a decision? You cannot, because you cannot ask sporadic questions, different candidates, and then being able to arrive and say, you know what, candidate A was better than candidate C. No, they are not on the same playing level, the playing field, right? Past performance is not an indicator of future success. That's proven. Why? Because superstar in environment X becomes a failure in environment B, not because he or she is bad, but because there is something called culture, there's something called environmental variables and dynamics that derail his or her success. So you have to be very, very clear in terms of, is he a good culture fit by way of his working style, by way of his behaviors, motivation, and so on. Right? And be an SME. There is no other way other than you being really good at hiring. If you are able to dig deep, research, know more, invest more, and then being able to operate almost like a quasi functional head. That happens when you invest your time, which generally recruiters or talent acquisition guys don't do. Okay, coming back to the framework now, right? So we are quite short of time, so we'll try and rush as much as we can from the next couple of 10 minutes more. Talent acquisition journey for us is a good, bad, and ugly, really. So if you look at it, it comes out of 4 steps for me. And those 4 steps are these. You attract, you engage, you acquire somebody, you develop and retain. So when you attract, it's your brand experience, yeah, how good your company is, your organization is, what strides they have made, and why they should choose us, why we are an employer of choice. That's where you seduce the candidates in terms of saying, we are the best, come and work for us. Then you engage with them. Engage, that's a UX, which is a user experience. When you date and say, fair enough, let's meet up, let's have a chat, and let's understand each other. If this is the thing for you, how can we make you excited in terms of the opportunity that we have for you, right? Then you finally acquire, which means there's a marriage of thoughts, marriage of expectations. You're all aligned, you make an offer, he comes on board. Develop and retention, which is your EX. So once it comes in the organization, the talent acquisition job doesn't end, surprisingly. Why? Because you've got somebody along the entire journey. You cannot just say, okay, fine, I'll transition to HR or to ops or to business. You have to handhold him. You have to give him the comfort because you are the first point of contact, right? So how do you look at the employee experience so that he continues with you year in and year out, right? So that is the fulcrum really around which we operate. How best is your brand experience, your user experience, your customer experience, and your employee experience makes or breaks a good talent acquisition strategy. Moving on, as I told you, we are at different hiring maturity curves. It could be very chaotic, that's which has no processes, it's very ad hoc. It's basically recruitment and not talent acquisition at that point in time. You're firefighting all the while. You don't have a plan. You don't have a contingency planning or plan B. It's very ad hoc, arbitrary, and you are just staying afloat. Move on to level 2, inconsistent, which means few sparks of brilliance from individuals rather than the teams, right? So, but those are very rare. So, which means the processes are still not formalized. You are somehow operating. You can see those exceptions, but those exceptions are not the rule for you. Move on to systematic. Yes, it's process driven. You got your SLAs in place, you got the policies in place, everybody knows what to go in for, how the experience should be like. So it is something that is more systematic, and that brings you to a talent acquisition framework. This is where talent acquisition is truly called talent acquisition. Move on further to the strategic side, which is your automation is in place, the experience set is in there, you measure, you map, and you drive data-driven decision-making and attracting talents. So that is where the talent landscape, the hiring maturity curve changes from organization to organization. Some might move on from level 1 to level 3, or they take gradual sequential steps, but it's important for you to understand where you stay. And believe me, guys, it is not about a tick box exercise. It has to be bottom up, it has to be organic, and it's got to be lived, not professed. Operating models, as you are aware of, we have in-house, corporate, agencies, contract staffing, RPOs, and the like, and also the gig economy, where there are a lot of freelancers at play, contract staffing, you have part-timers who still do the job for you. So everywhere, the talent acquisition fundamentals remain the same. More so for an in-house corporate because you own it, not as much for an agency because you're driven by invoices, you're driven by clients, clientele, account management. Contract staffing, yes, you outsource somebody on your visa, on your payroll, and this on a secondment basis. So how much of an engagement there is, that's got to be seen. But the fundamentals remain the same. The hiring maturity curve, selection, interview techniques, everything else remains the same. If you look at in-house model, now again, of course, we have centralized, we have decentralized, we have the center of excellence, and we have the shared services, right? So depending on which structure do you have, either it's matrix or conventional, your fundamentals still remain the same, but it will have to be tweaked depending on the nuances. Centralized, absolutely fair. You can have everybody under one umbrella. You can drive adherence better, standardization better. Decentralized, it might not be easy, but you might have an overarching governance framework with which you can drive and lead. Then you have a COE. More and more so companies are getting the COE concept in place, which sits at the top along with the corporate office or the group holding office, which is more of a center of excellence, which is you look at strategic frameworks, you enable the business, you value add the business while letting them do their transactional work, right? And then you have something called a shared service where you say, fair enough, I have organizations and businesses all across the globe. You know what? I like to have a shared service model where my talent acquisition function is driven from a particular hotspot, and then I charge back to the businesses in terms of the services being rendered. Shared service is basically a cultural call. It drives economies of scale, but that's again a concept that works or doesn't work really. Looking at the agencies model, executive search, senior contingent search, then you have the contract staffing and the bulk hiring. For people who are on the agency side, let's not flatter ourselves. We are not executive search if we don't have the tools and the kind of talent that we need to have, right? Executive search is Egon Zehnder, your Korn Ferry, you look at Hydrogen Struggle, Svensson, Stewart, where they've invested in people, and each of the talent that they have is probably 20 years of experience in that particular field. So it's better to probably understand where we are. And I come from the agency side also at some kind of point in time in the past. And I have felt the urge to be called as executive search firm, which I have not, because it's a senior contingent search firm, because that's what I do. I hire from mid to a senior level. Executive search firm work only on retained search, right? They do only CX suite. So I think as far as we understand that better, from an agency point of view, we will be able to drive our deliverables and credibility much better. Contract staffing is a secondment basis. Bulk hiring has its own nuances, so let's not even get there. I spoke about a profile. We kind of dissected things about profile. Now we come to a success profile, right? What does it make a success profile? You have hard skills, you have soft skills, and you have potential. So when you hire, your hard skills would be your education, would be your experience, would be your skill sets. That's your hard skills. Soft skills would be your culture, your behavioral aspects, your motivational aspects, and so on and so on. And potential is you don't hire for people to do the job for you only now. You are looking at people who are scalable, who can do your job less than the 1 year, 2 years down the line. The business landscape would have changed, when the complexity would have increased manifold, and yet the person can scale up and do their job effectively. I'll give you a particular scenario though, and let's say one of the studies that came out about hard and soft competencies. Survey was done by Egon Zehnder, one of the largest executive search firms in the world. And they came back with a survey of global leaders, and they came back with a finding which said that people get increasingly hired for their hard skills, but fired for their soft. So see, if you look at comparing candidates on a particular comparison criteria, hard skills will more probably be similar. It could be a CA, it could be engineer, it could be MBA, whatever be the case. But beyond an experience set would also probably be similar. But what differentiates them is their EQ, or the soft skills, or the culture, or the resilience, the capability, adaptation, and all of that. That makes or breaks a leader. So you have to keep that in mind, though. It's not only about hard skills, it's about the cultural aspects, which is getting pronounced by the day. Okay, let's try and building a TA playbook very quickly, just to give you a nuance, because we are constrained in terms of time, so we'll try and make it very quick. Number one, let's start with the basics. Process, SOP, SLA, that makes your policy, right? So let's get that right. We can't operate like headless chickens if we don't have a robust policy in place. Process is a process if it doesn't have much wriggle room. The moment you have questions like what, when, where, how, and there's a wriggle room to be able to play around, that's not a robust process for you. SOP, drill down detail by detail, where there's no ambiguity as well as to what they need to do, either if you're doing a manual process or if you automate it, what happens on Oracle Recruitment Cloud or an SAP or Ramco or whichever software that you use. And SLAs, you got to measure, how can you not have SLAs and tasks from the selection flows to time to hire, time to close, and so on and so forth. So you need to tie them up with SLAs in terms of particular flow or a transaction happening in how many hours and how many working days, how many calendar days it's got to be finished. And you measure and improve and take it from there. So these are the hygiene factors which needs to be there. Second, let's move on to TA metrics. Basically, the three key ones are time to hire, cost to hire, and the quality of hire. So if you're able to map these 3 metrics, you are well on the journey of the hiring maturity curve from systematic to the strategic side, right? What does this mean though? Time to hire, it is basically, you call it requisition or a position from the date the particular requisition is approved to the time the offer is accepted. That could be one of your time to hire. Second is your requisition approved date to the hiring date when the guy finally comes on board. Why do we make it 2 layered? Is because in front of the talent acquisition person, there's so much of control he has over the candidate joining, right? You can lead up the entire selection matrix for him and give him an offer and accepts the offer. Beyond that, there are certain variables like he might put down his resignation, might not be accepted, he will not probably join you, or he changes his mind. That is not in the recruiter's control. So hence this 2 as a balancing act. Then you look at the quality of hire, hiring manager experience survey, employees completing the 6 months or 3 months, whichever be the case in terms of probation period. That is an indicator that he or she has been quality of hire. And then you run the surveys and the survey results comes back and then you map them in terms of rating scale and take a call. And then you have the cost to hire in terms of what is the cost needed. Let's say the cost per seat that is invested in terms of hiring those many people. Right? So these are the 3 things that really make up your so-called toolkit in terms of assessing whether you're on the right curve or the right direction. Number 3, structured hiring approach. As I told you, hygiene factors. You look at Wiseman and all the techniques. You look at approach. You look at the tools and techniques, and that's what takes you through. Number 4, competency-based interviews, which is your STAR, funnel, and KISS. Get a competency framework done, even if you're not aligned by, let's say, a Hayes or a Mercer, or you let an outside consultant do the competency framework exercise or project for you. Try and adopt something to start off with, because then it gets aligned with those common values and vision, which can then be used to connect the dots to your KRA, KPIs, assessment centers, psychometric assessments, and all of that. Then it will make sense. Then you have something called KISS, which is keep it short and simple. We complicate things a lot. You make it too flamboyant just for the sheen of the glitz. Let's deliver qualitatively. And number 5 is the branding and the EVP, really. Clarify what you stand for, simplify what you need to be known as, and amplify it. As many channels, be it LinkedIn, be it social media angles, be it through your candidate experience, word of mouth referrals, and all of that, right? So you can do it, but yes, branding is in, and any organization which is caught napping, doing great work, but not showcasing it outside, not making it known outside, is probably missing the bus. Talent influencers, probably another 5 minutes, and then I'll be probably wrapping it up. Talent influencers is those other voices in the organization which dispels the myth that recruiting or hiring is the job of the talent acquisition team. It could start off from your leader, from your CEOs, your business heads, your functional heads. It could be anybody who is outside your talent acquisition function, but who contributes, enables you to hire better. Let's look at the first one. The talent leader is basically the leader, might not always be the CEO, could be a functional head, could be a business head, could be a team leader, who makes hiring as the first priority and makes that as a top of his agenda in his weekly meetings, in his review sessions, and saying, how are we gearing up? Are we catering to the right kind of mix of talents we need for? What was the quality of hire? What's been the cost of hire? This conversion, which is the hiring, is on the top of his agenda, which means he becomes a talent leader or a talent maker for you. Moving on to talent magnet, you look at your hiring managers, right? Hiring managers can do their own efforts in terms of hiring the right people. They can connect with a network. They can give you mapping lists and say, fam, this is where I think we should poach from. This is where we should map from, benchmark to, and all of that. And they spread the word. You showcase something on LinkedIn, they'll probably repost it from there and say, you know what, this is a great team to work for. And this is what we're going to do. This is the growth journey so far. This is what you can look forward to. So they enhance your efforts in terms of hiring right. Thirdly, talent partner, which means the hiring managers becomes a part of your embedded hiring team. They give you the right job specs. They help you in your effort to find the right interview time, to do the interviews right, to fill up the evaluation forms right, and help you succeed together collectively. To probably conclude, TA framework basically is about 4 things really. People, you have process, you have tech, and then you have visibility, right? So it all is about people, wherein you look at internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, being able to drive the experience set thereof, the candidate experience, employee experience, brand experience, and the user experience. Process, absolutely robust processes, everybody in the same page, they have been trained, change management programs have been done, they understand what is expected and how they should drive it to have a standardized approach. Tech, you look at ATS function, you look at third-party integrated tools, you drive it right, because you have to look at, be it any kind of automation. You might have a Maybach, right? But if you don't use the Maybach right, it's of no use. Look at the right kind of touch points where the candidates will come in and say, hey, you know what, that was very seamless and that was not cumbersome at all, vis-a-vis so many companies that we applied for earlier. That's a win-win for you. So make it your own hiring journey. Every moment you should own it, right? And visibility, whatever you have, showcase it and try and tell the world why you are the best to work for. I'll end up with a thought though, food for thought really. This is from David Ogilvy. He said, if we continue to hire people who are smaller than who we are, we become a company of dwarfs. But if we continue to hire people who are bigger than who we are, we become a company of giants. This is a very profound statement though, because it just shows as to how the talent landscape is changing, how our talent strategy is changing. And one of the facets of you having a very good, robust talent acquisition playbook is also to realize that we are not hiring somebody who we can dominate. We are not insecure, but we are trying to have somebody in the team who comes with a different lens, no baggage, and add value in fit, right? So that's the approach that needs to change. And I think if you can just take it further, that will be your building blocks for your talent acquisition policy or your playbook, so to speak. Thank you so much for the patient listening. I think we have stood by the constraints of time. Noel, probably 5-10 minutes late.
No, absolutely not. I guess, the flow was absolutely fantastic. And I really love the way how you mentioned about how strategically we need to place these aspects and, also talking about those 3 T's, right? It was absolutely amazing hosting you and also listening. I was making my notes as well. I'm sure participants were too. So I really, really want to, thank you from the bottom of my heart for, bringing it across. So it's time for questions as well. So I request, before I, post the question as well, we have another poll that we'd like to take in terms of also looking at, what are the challenges that we'd want to, part in talent acquisition. Would it be sourcing? Would it be screening? Would it be interviewing, right? I request all of our participants to also take this poll because the next session or the next segment would be the question and answer segment, which will also be able to help you guys understand what progressively what we are planning as well. So this is something that I'd like all of you guys to please do take it. We have another 7 seconds before we close the poll. So I request all the participants to kindly participate taking the poll too. So another 3 seconds and we can probably wrap up the poll too.
Sure.
Okay. And so with your permission, may I end the poll and also share the results?
Yes, please.
Perfect. All right. So here how the results also look like. Predominantly, we also have making sure a candidate joins and followed by sourcing, screening, and interviewing as well. Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yes, see, I mean, as the saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? So you start off something, it's got to conclude well. So I do agree with them, irrespective of how much that we invest in. If it doesn't probably realize its outcome, a person doesn't join, obviously it's all futile because there's the investment of time, effort, and all of that, right? But what this poll also says, Noel, is, we start right, we end up right.
Right.
Sourcing is right. That becomes a very critical part of your attraction engagement journey. And the talent acquisition then finally acquires a talent and he joins, right? So it's about how you're able to make the entire, let's say, input process output journey that much robust. So if you're doing your basics right, the beginning of the process, more often than not, it will conclude right. So
well,
yes.
Thanks for formulating that for us. And I'm sure that, everyone's making notes and also writing down those formulas that will definitely help us progressively make the talent playbook. So guys, I know that we are about time, but then, we'll just take a quick couple of minutes, a little bit more. And I want to also ask if you have any questions. I guess there are some questions also that in the chat box. So it says, could you please explain again the experienced hire and mid-level hire is the question. So if you can just give the synopsis, Mr. Roy, then we can probably progress further.
See, I mean, when it comes to these two levels of hiring, now what you have to keep in mind is the kind of talent landscape or the talent pool, talent segment they're trying to cater to. They come with a certain level of sophistication and industry insight with which they can probably evaluate a talent acquisition guy's prowess to be able to engage with them fruitfully. Say, for example, if you're engaging with the CEO, right? Now, the CEO will only engage with you if you know your domain right, you're able to challenge him, and you're able to have an educated discussion. And hence, you being able to research and being able to surprise him with certain aspects of his industry that he is in, certain trends, certain market intelligence, which he doesn't know, that will probably insight his brain further. And he'll be able to, let's say, have a more educated and qualified conversation rather than somebody who comes in with just a bit of question and answer round that really, is okay with the lower level hiring, but not at his level. Because see, when you look at high level, senior level hiring, they come in to understand the vision. They generally don't ask what is the play in terms of salary or what's my role. He knows his role, right? But he's just trying to find out as to where does it fit in, whether it's worth the while. When you look at, let's say, a slightly mid-level hiring, they are at a certain structure in the organization where they have aspirations to grow. And that's the reason why they move, because they are stagnating probably in the current organization, or they're not finding that empowerment or those projects in which they would like to build their career on. So your questions should be on those lines to fair enough. You can probably be, let's say, a manager and we're interviewing you for a senior manager role, but what does it take for you to move on from manager to a senior manager? Do you have it or not? These are very pointed questions to ask, and hence the conversation becomes a bit more detailed, a bit more direct than what you'd have with the CEO, probably.
Absolutely. Very brilliantly explained there and in the interest of time, well, I'd like to, go ahead and thank you as well, sir. Truly appreciate that, the thoughts that you've shared, and it definitely gave us a deeper perspective. And also, I guess this would, be those building blocks of success. So we'd love to, also be a part of your podcast sometime, but thank you so much. And we'd love to have you again here. It was an absolute pleasure hosting you along, sir.
Same here. Thank you so much. It was a very interesting session, though. Now, when you look at a webinar, it's not really engaging in that sense of the word. But having said that, I think if some of the key takeaways that we can take in and probably apply to what we are doing, it makes the job slightly easier than I think your and my work is done.
Certainly, sir. Absolutely. And please have a happy weekend ahead. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
All right. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for holding up. And here's your brownie content for today. As promised, well, this is from the Foundit's Insight Tracker, where I'd like to also, talk to you about the country-wise, year-on-year growth in terms of the e-recruitment activity in February 23 versus February 2022. Well, Saudi Arabia there at 12%, followed by Egypt. Then you also have Bahrain. Well, if you look at the industry-wise updates that we talked about, we have hospitality leading from the front, and then we also have the petrochemicals industry too. And please find this, and I'm sure that a lot of people have also asked us this question in terms of where they can find this data. This brownie content could be you can find it on the Foundit LinkedIn page, and you can also find it on Foundit Gulf. So please do visit our LinkedIn page to be able to, concentrate information and also procure the hiring trends as well. Again, this is also presented by the Foundit Insights Tracker. So I'm sure that you all look forward to that, but I cannot wait to also showcase this Foundit Insights Tracker in the next session too. So this is the data that will also be handy with you in being able to help you strategize and also plan well. And before you go, yes, your opinion matters, and we look forward to also read, reciprocate, and also work on the feedback that you'd like to give us. Please do take the poll, and you'll also have a poll that, the link post this session, which you can take it. I request all of you to please do take the poll, and it was indeed a pleasure hosting all of you today. Your opinion matters. Please do remember that, and it will also help us serve you guys better. So thank you so much, all of you, for joining with us today. This is Noel signing off, and I look forward for another action-packed session. Have a smashing weekend ahead. Thank you so much. Take care of yourselves, and we are signing off from Foundit. Thank you.